You are listening to Proof Text, a Glossa House podcast exploring Scripture and all things related to it. New episodes are released daily. For more information, check out glossahouse.com and subscribe to our channels on Spotify and YouTube. Welcome and enjoy.
Hello and welcome to Proof Text. I am Michael Halcomb, and in this episode, we're thinking about a fallacy of the week or fallacies of the week. In the last couple episodes, I've been sharing several different types of fallacies and explaining those and giving examples of those, definitions of those, and it's good to be very aware of these particular types of fallacies so we can identify them. And in this episode, I'm going to share with you three more that I'm thinking about. So the first fallacy that I want to put on your radar, and by the way, remember that, in the realm of like arguing or debating, critical thinking, logical fallacies, ultimately they represent flaws in reasoning, right? Flaws in reasoning, and those flaws work to undermine the validity of an argument. And so there are tons of logical fallacies, but the three that I want to share with you here are the bandwagon fallacy, the moral equivalence fallacy, and the red herring fallacy. So let's look at each of these. The bandwagon fallacy first. This is where, or this occurs when somebody's arguing that an idea or a certain course of action is right simply because it's popular or widely accepted. In other words, the fallacy is asserting that something must be good or true because a lot of people believe it or a lot of people do it. This is very, very common. You might hear something like, for example, oh, everybody's watching this, new TV show, so it must be fantastic, or everybody's listening to this new song, you're going to love it. Well, no, not necessarily, right? Just because a bunch of people are doing it doesn't mean it's fantastic or that you're going to love it. Or millions of people use this particular brand of a smartphone, so it must be the best one. Well, no, not necessarily. And so here's some tips to kind of identify those sorts of things when they're being used. One, look out for phrases like, oh, everyone's doing it. That's very sort of very common. Millions of people believe, right? Or the majority agrees, the majority thinks, the majority says. And also evaluate whether the popularity of an idea is being used as evidence for its validity rather than actual reasoning or actual evidence, right? All right, here's the other one, or the second one, moral equivalence, the moral equivalence fallacy. And this is the fallacy of comparing minor misdeeds, usually of comparing minor misdeeds with major atrocities, okay? Or comparing two actions that are fundamentally different in scale or significance as if they're equally wrong or equally acceptable. For example, right? Sure, the government might have committed human rights violations, but what about those protesters who vandalize public property? Okay, well, vandalizing public property is very different and isn't on the same level, right, as human rights violations. But that statement is trying to equate the two. I just heard someone doing this fallacy today, right? We were talking about the issue of human sexuality, and the person was trying to say, we shouldn't really be focusing on things like transgenderism or homosexuality because we got things like wars to deal with, right? And so there's this like moral equivocating or putting these things on the a level of equivalence. So you have this moral equivalence fallacy, and actually using that to try to diminish or lessen the severity of the thing that's under discussion. Another example, right? Both sides in the conflict have engaged in violence, and so they're equally at fault. Well, no, that's not true. Just because both sides were engaged, one might have initiated it unjustly and unfairly. One may have had the upper hand all the time. One may have been more abusive. Just because both sides are involved in a fight doesn't mean they're equally at fault. It's like this stupid no-fault driving rule. So when people one way to identify this is when people are trying to make comparisons that are suggesting two actions or situations are like equal in moral weight without considering their context or scale. And another thing is you can consider whether the comparison is overlooking important differences between the two actions and or situations. The third thing I want to put on your radar is the red herring. And this fallacy occurs when somebody introduces irrelevant information or an unrelated topic into an argument to distract, right? To divert attention away from the real issue being discussed. And I've seen this one used so often. This might be one of the top ones, one of the most important ones. This fallacy aims to distract and confuse rather than address the core argument. So say you're a whistleblower, right? And you shared a document that exposed somebody's corrupt beliefs or practices, and then people want to focus on your sharing of the document rather than actually the corruption that the document exposes. You could say, you might hear something like this: you're criticizing my policy proposal, but what about what you've been doing? Right? So they're distracting from the issue at hand. And so just watch on this one shifts in the topic of conversation, like sudden shifts, right? That seem disconnected from the original argument. People do this all the time. They're masters of this, whether they even know it or not. I think a lot of people know it. It's a way to get the heat off of them or the issue that they don't want to talk about. And question when somebody makes this shift to a sudden new topic. You can question whether that new information is relevant. Like, is this relevant to the point? And then you can get back to the other point, right? Is this relevant to the point, or are you like trying to deflect, our attention? So you need to be able to recognize. We all need to be able to recognize these common logical fallacies because they're essential for critical thinking and effective arguing. And so by understanding and identifying this fallacious reasoning, we can better evaluate the strength of others' arguments as well as our own and engage in more rational, logical discourse. All right, my friends, I'm going to stop there and say I hope that helps.
Interested in growing your ancient language skills but not sure where to start? Glossa House can help. From illustrated readers and short stories to lexicons and grammars, Glossa House offers a variety of resources for beginning, intermediate, and experienced ancient language learners. Head to glossahouse.com today. Glossa House, language resources for the global community.